Hi and welcome to my channel. Thanks so much for being here. If it's your first time here, a very warm welcome. If you're interested in religions and spiritual movements, I hope you'll check out some of the other videos and join with me often. A while back, I made a video about the purpose of religion, some things about how it developed and how it helps to explain to people things that they don't understand. And I said in that video that although religions very often positively explain things to people and meet their needs, over history, a number of times various religions have gotten way off track, and as we look back at some of the things that they did in the name of religion, we are horrified. Today I want to talk to you about one of those things, and that was the witch hunts and witchcraft in the Middle Ages. And so I'm going to begin, first of all, with a scripture from the Bible, because religions take their cue from things that they read in their holy books, and this is a time when Christianity was off base, and it was basing the basic beliefs of the faith about witchcraft are found in their Bible. So I'm looking in Deuteronomy chapter 18 verses 9 and 10, and maybe a little after that. When you come into the land which the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not learn to imitate the abominations of those people there. Let there be none found among you, not found among you anyone who immolates his son or daughter in the fire. Now that is a reference to child sacrifice, which they claim was happening. And that was forbidden by these Jewish people as they came into this new land. But that's not for us today. Nor a fortune teller, soothsayer, charmer, a diviner, or caster of spells, nor one who consults ghosts and spirits or seeks oracles from the dead. Anyone who does such things is an abomination to the Lord, and because of such abominations, the Lord your God is driving those nations out of your way. In another place it is written, thou shalt not allow a witch to live. And so with that as the background, religions, Christianity, had no problem with going after witches. A little bit more about the background of the trials, and I'm going to try to set the stage for you. Between 1400 AD, of course, and 1775, there were about 100,000 people prosecuted for witchcraft in both Europe and the Americas. And the next time I talk about this topic, it's going to be about the witchcraft trials in Salem, Massachusetts, which are quite famous in the United States, and we have a lot of writing and literature and history about them. I'll talk about those today. I want to talk about what happened in Europe, particularly in France, Germany, England, and eventually Italy. People were tried and executed for practicing witchcraft. Many of these people were elderly women. The majority were women, many were elderly. In the villages, and most of this actually happened in the smaller towns and villages. And of course, their cities were not as huge as they are today. So even a city didn't have the population that we do today. But elderly women were often known as the wise ones or the elders, and usually they lived alone, possibly 2 or 3 women living together. But they knew about the old things. They knew about herbs, and they knew about helping with things like sickness. Very often they acted as midwives or nurses in the community. They might have been healers. And because they were elderly women who lived alone, in some ways they were marginalized. Now, the belief about witches was that they received powers to harm others. And they received their powers from Satan or the devil, and they served the devil. They had in some way made a pact with Satan, and in return for doing these evil things, doing his bidding, they would receive these powers. One of them, people believed, was the ability to fly. People used the idea of these witchcrafts, these women, and sometimes men, doing these witchcraft spells and using potions and meeting together and worshiping the devil to explain unexplainable things, why bad things happened, like an unexpected death, a miscarriage, an illness of people or livestock, crop failures, and accidents, especially if there had been a disagreement between this elderly woman and the person either who died or became sick or something bad happened to them. There didn't seem to be any other explanation except this old marginalized woman maybe was a witch and was casting a spell on them. So witchcraft was for centuries considered a superstition, and people were discouraged from practicing witchcraft or going to a witch, someone they thought was a witch, maybe for a potion or help with some disease or something. But eventually, the interest in witchcraft and the tracking down of witches and trying them and eventually executing them coincided in time with the Inquisition. And so there was a shift from just being a bad superstition and something you shouldn't do to being heresy and undermining the Catholic Church and its teachings. And once it became a heresy, the Inquisition, of course, the purpose of it was to blot out any heresy and any heretical people. I have some videos on the Cathars and the Waldensians and others where the Catholic Church went in and wiped out or attempted to wipe out heresy by destroying entire groups of people who called themselves Christian but disagreed with the mainline church. Now, I don't make believe, like some people, that I don't have notes. I want you to know I have some notes here because I want to talk to you about a particular pope and a particular manual. It was the European Witch Hunters Manual. So I'm getting the information about this manual from a website called thoughtco.com. And the article was written by Joan Johnson Lewis. and I will put the address so you can look for this information yourself online. So they wrote a book. It was called Malleus Maleficarum, and it was written in 1486 and 1487. In English, that is The Hammer of Witches. It was a book credited to two German Dominican monks, Heinrich Kramer and Jakob Sprenger, and these two were also theology professors. Now, this wasn't the only document that was available at the time for people who wanted to hunt down these so-called evil witches, but it was produced right about the time of the Gutenberg printing press being invented, so there were more of these than the handwritten manuals that had preceded them. So this text, this Hammer of Witches, came at a peak point in European witchcraft accusations and executions, and it was a foundation for treating witchcraft not as a superstition, as I mentioned, but as a dangerous and heretical practice of associating with the devil. So, in 1841, Pope Innocent VIII heard from the two German monks, and the communication he received described these instances of witchcraft and said that the church was not sufficiently cooperating with their investigations. Now, several popes before this had written or taken action on witches, and these popes were concerned with heresies and other beliefs and activities contrary to the church's teachings. But after Innocent VIII got this communication from the monks, he, in 1484, issued a papal bull that is an official statement giving authority to someone from the Pope to act on behalf of the church. And it gave full authority to these two inquisitors, threatening with excommunication or other sanctions any who molested or hindered in any way the manner of their work. So this bull, from its opening words, put the pursuit of witches clearly as pursuing heresy and promoting the Catholic Church. Now, 3 years after the papal bull, these two men produced a new handbook on the subject of witches. And the word Maleficarum means harmful magic or witchcraft. And this is the manual used to hammer out those practices. It documented beliefs about witches, told ways to identify witches, convict them on the charge of witchcraft, and execute them for the crime. Now, the manual charges that witchcraft was mostly found among women, and this is a reflection of at least the Dominican belief about women at the time. The manual bases this on the idea that both good and evil in women tend to be extreme. After providing many stories of women's vanity, tendency toward lying, and weak intellect, the inquisitors also alleged that a woman's lust is at the basis of all witchcraft, thus giving these accusations also a sexual tone, a sexual accusation. Midwives were especially singled out as wicked for their supposed ability to prevent conception or terminate a pregnancy by deliberate miscarriage. They also claimed that midwives tend to eat infants or with live births to offer children to devils. Now, what the manual said was that the witches form a pact with the devil. They copulate with a form of devils who have the appearance of life through aerial bodies. It also asserts that they can possess another person's body and that they can make male sexual organs disappear. Now, many of their sources of evidence for the weakness or wickedness of lives was from early pagan and Christian writings. Well, the third part of the book deals with the goal of exterminating witches, and it gives detailed guidance how to separate false accusations from truthful one. And it's always assuming that witchcraft and harmful magic really existed. It wasn't just a superstition, and it did real harm to individuals, and it undermined the church with a kind of heresy. Well, one way that witches were examined was a physical examination. They were stripped of their clothing and examined by other women, in particular for marks on their bodies that were called the devil's mark. That could be something like a mole or a discoloration or a birthmark. And if that was found, that was supposed to be proof that they were a witch. There was also support for burning and attempting to drown a witch. And at one point I had information which I seem to have lost. So if you know which Pope wrote regarding this, maybe you can even fill it in for me in the comments section. But they could test a witch, and the tests were justified to see if a woman could be drowned or burned. If she could be drowned or burned, then she was innocent. If she could not be, she was probably guilty, so she could be executed, or at least put in prison. Of course, the woman who was innocent and had been drowned or burned wasn't alive to enjoy her innocence, her freedom. And then they had to get confessions from these women and sometimes men, and were allowed to torture them in order to get a confession. And basically, without a confession, they weren't supposed to execute a woman or a witch, but they could torture them in order to get their confession. And once they had this confession, then they could move further along in the process. Another thing they asked witches to do under torture was to implicate others. The idea was that things would go easier on them if they implicated others. But the prosecutors, in promising that they wouldn't be executed, didn't necessarily tell them the whole truth, but didn't tell the person that she or he couldn't be executed without a confession, and didn't tell her that they could be imprisoned for life on bread and water after implicating others, even if she didn't confess. And she or he could be turned over to secular law, and they did have the power to execute them. The manual also included spells and special words that judges and prosecutors could use that would protect them from any power the witches had of recrimination for what was happening to them. This manual, The Hammer of Witchcraft, was used by both Catholics and Protestants. Now, it was never an official document of the church, but it was widely used by both branches of the church. And although it was aided by Gutenberg's invention of movable type, the manual itself wasn't in continual publication. When witchcraft prosecutions increased in an area, then the manual would be published and distributed among the witch hunters. Well, I guess that's based on the idea that the church had at the time, that if you believed, participated in, or said anything that did not conform to their basic doctrines, that you could just be killed. I'd love to hear your opinion about that. Mine is that the church had gotten way off base into areas that their God had never intended for them. And thankfully, the persecution of witches died out. As I mentioned, next time I will do a video about the Salem Witchcraft Trials, and we'll see how and how many people were executed in the United States during the 1600s. And of course it wasn't the United States then, was it? It was the colonies. So as I mentioned, I will be doing a video on the Salem Witchcraft Trials, and when I get it prepared, I will add a link to this description box for you. Well, there have been hundreds of books and many theories about these witchcraft trials and just the whole idea of witchcraft in general. And if that's a topic of interest to you, I hope that you'll research it further. If you found this video informative, I hope you'll join with me again in the future as we look at another topic like this one. Thanks for being here. I'll see you soon.